My name is Spiros Dimolitsas. I'm the Chief Administrating Officer at Georgetown University, and I have been with the university for roughly 9 years. My previous background prior to coming to the university has been one of hardcore engineering, and so a lot of my perspectives that I brought to the university role has been one of an engineer. Yeah, I would say that basically 4 things. The first one is an enterprise that constantly looks at risk, one that doesn't become complacent thinking that, is never at risk or is not as much risk as it may turn out to be the case. The second is, the enterprise needs to have a framework by which it can describe the risk in a way that is crisp, clear, and simple. Uses a common language so everybody in the enterprise can understand what may be at risk and what the implication of being at risk really means. The third thing I would say is an enterprise that looks really quite broadly at risk. It doesn't really focus only on financial risk, it doesn't really focus only on operational risk, it doesn't just really focus only on physical security risk, it doesn't even focus on just supply risk, but one that really looks across all possible ways that the enterprise can be placed at risk and thinks about them holistically and in an integrative way. And the last one, I think, is an enterprise that really not only recognizes and understands risk and can describe it, but really follows through in deliberately accepting risk, managing risk, putting mitigation plans in place, and thinking about risk as a system rather than individual peculiarity that may have to be managed one time or another, but not on a continuous basis in an integrative way. For us at Georgetown, we've adopted a basically 6-step process, and the process starts by, first of all, identifying potential risks. These are potential things that people may be worried about, our staff, our faculty, our administrators may be concerned, and so that is the very first step. The second step is really one of trying to quantify those risks so that we can prioritize them and obviously attack the ones that are more significant and leave the ones that are less of a concern behind. The quantification sometimes is done by number, sometimes is done by some kind of rank order. Once we have the priority set, then our next step is really to think about how we can reduce the risks. So in some cases, we might be able to reduce them by avoiding the risk altogether. In other cases, we may redesign a process to reduce the impact of something if it were to happen. In some cases, we may simply transfer the risk by a means like an insurance to another entity. Once we've basically done this redesign, we still have some risk left over. And at that point, we go to the 4th step, which is basically a preparedness plan. We prepare to respond to the risk should it ever materialize. This is what sometimes is called acceptance of the risk, but nonetheless, the process is the same. We understand what risk we're left over with, and we prepare basically to respond to it. Should something happen that makes that risk actually occur, then we obviously respond to it. Our response plans are pretty comprehensive. They include everything from emergency preparedness, since we have a large community who is actually living on campus, to things that are more straightforward to most other businesses like financial, things and operating risks. And finally, the last step is really after we've actually responded to a risk, we typically do a lessons learned exercise, which is basically learning and improving. So next time something like this might happen, we have a process in place that continues to improve. At one time, and this goes now quite a few years back, we made the determination that, for our own purposes, we would want to provide for a safe environment over and above what was required by code, and that in some cases entailed putting additional fire protection systems in some of our residence halls. And we thought it was a responsible decision. We went ahead and executed it. But what we discovered very shortly thereafter was that our insurance rates went down. And by the mere fact that we were significantly better than code, we enjoyed better insurance rates. And we used those savings to effectively offset additional risks that we thought the institution might experience. In that particular case, we bought business continuity insurance. So should our operations ever get disrupted, we would have significant business disruption insurance. We did all that actually prior to Katrina, so it turned out to be an interesting time when we found when Katrina actually hit some of the institutions down in the Gulf, they found themselves with significantly less business interruption insurance that we happened to have had at the time. So it was a self-reinforcing cycle where we started with something that we thought we wanted to do to provide a safety environment. Insurance premiums got reduced because of that. We reinvested those to business interruption insurance, and quite frankly, I think it had an impact in a financial position in terms of a credit rating, because in some indirect way it was a factor in considering us a safer, financially a safer institution than if we didn't have that kind of insurance. I think in general, as an institution, a board of directors, a president, has got an uncharacteristically high interest in ensuring that at all times we're all aware of what the risks are, they're managed properly. I think that's a little distinct about this institution compared to other organizations I've worked with. So it really starts from the very top, where there is the fiduciaries of the institution are very interested to make sure that the risks are addressed and managed properly. And then as we roll it down to individual operating units that may actually have to identify the risks and manage them, I think we try to find instances where managing the risk also produces some secondary business benefits, so it doesn't become entirely a burden that somebody has to face with, but it really has some other beneficial effect. Maybe a business process gets improved, maybe by managing a risk we become more effective in anticipating fluctuations in demand in some other way. We remove other surprises that sometimes people care if they do not directly care about the risk that we're trying to manage. So trying to find as many of those cases or articulating the case in as many ways as we possibly can that their secondary beneficial effects tends to be what usually allows us to make progress. The way we think about risk in terms of characterizing it, different organizations struggle with it. Sometimes, a university might characterize it by the campuses they have. They may have a campus here and there, and they capture it that way. Some other universities might capture it according to the schools they may have. We decided we're not going to make a deliberate choice, but recognize that it's possible to characterize it in different ways, depending on how you actually want to describe the risk and how you want to manage it. But at the end of the day, we really have three ways to do it. The one is what I call the risk pyramid. So we start with risks that may be related to specific controls being in place that if you do not attend to eventually become process issues and process failures, and ultimately become more significant risks that affect the whole enterprise. So this is what I call the pyramid of risk, where you start with very few that may be departmental, level oriented, to ones that may affect one or more campuses, to the ones that affect the whole institution. The ones at the top, we tend to call them strategic risks because they affect the very livelihood of the institution if they were to materialize. Another way that we think about risk, which is quite different, is in alignment with basic key mission and objectives. So one of our mission is obviously to maintain academic excellence. Another mission is to do good things in the world and to be responsive and attentive to things that matter, global issues and the like. And a third area that we care about is a financial performance. So another way we look at the risk might be academic excellence, important issues of the day, and financial performance. And pretty much every risk we can group into one of those three categories. And then the final way we look at risk, we characterize it, is according to what I call is, how the risk might emerge. So it might be a community safety risk that may be the result of an accident. So we look at, risks and bucket them under community safety. Another way may be what some people call business continuity. These are basically risks or a failure of a business system to perform as designed, as in contrast to a failure of a business system to perform as needed, which is more of what we call sometimes a business performance risk, and finally a financing risk. So we have those four categories as well: financing the operation, a business performance risk, somebody making a bad decision where the system fails to perform as needed, versus a business continuity risk where the system was performing as needed, but it failed to perform as designed at some point in time, and the physical hazard risk. So we have different ways of describing the risk. There can be different utility depending on maybe who you're trying to assign the responsibility for managing the risk, or who you're actually describing the risk to, or who has fiduciary responsibility for ensuring that the risk is managed.